In this video we're going to talk about labour flexibility and apply the PESTLE approach to the analysis of conditions in the labour market. So essentially we're going to deal with what's known as environmental analysis, in this case PESTLE. We'll see what PESTLE means. It'll be a revision on previous classes on the course. But we'll have a look at what PESTLE means, and we'll look at it in the context of the labour market. So environmental forces such as PESTLE, politics, economics, social, technical, legal and environmental. So environmental forces such as PESTLE have the capability to change or affect the way human resources are managed. So the wider environment affects the way human resources are managed. It determines the extent of the involvement of people in work through economic forces, for example, and it also determines how we work in all sorts of ways: the legal conditions, the technological conditions, and so on. And we want to see how these are applied in the context of our analysis of the labour market. Changes within the external environment will have an impact on the labour market and the way organisations structure their people resources. So the external environment impacts on the labour market, and of course the labour market is, in a sense, the interface between people and the organisation. The labour market is what determines pay, remuneration, salary in general. It also will determine the conditions of employment, the skills that are required. So the labour market is a complex economic phenomenon which brings together workers and employers, the employees and the employers, and tries to work out some sort of equilibrium or agreement between the two sides, which will enable them to work, to perform functions within industry, and at the same time the employees receive rewards, good working conditions perhaps, and good remuneration. So the labour market is affected by the wider environmental factors, the economic factors, the technological factors and so on, and we need to go across these and look at how they influence the labour market and thereby determine the involvement of people and the conditions that people work under in industry. The economy is fast changing with constant threats from competitors worldwide. This will have an effect on employees and the type of jobs available. Well, we live in an ever increasingly complex society. We have not just the onset of very rapid technological change and changes to working practices because of changing technology, but we also have the onset of more trade liberalisation globally, which has the impact of enabling foreign competitors to compete on domestic markets, which means that domestic producers now must not just be aware of domestic competitors but also be aware of global competitors. So as far as the business is concerned, the world has become extremely complicated. So clearly this is an external factor to the business. The business didn't cause this to happen. The business didn't cause technological change, didn't cause the internet or cause global trading on the scale we see today. But the business has to work with that. It has to recognize it. It is a fact of life and it has to deal with it. The business did not, perhaps to any great extent, unless through the political process, agitate for globalization. It happened because the desire on the part of the consumers to get cheap imported products was overwhelming. There was a need politically to involve countries that were perhaps in the past not connected to the outside world, countries like China, for example, but also many other countries, what was the Soviet Union. Now there is considerable trade with Russia, and the old Soviet bloc may have broken up, but we trade extensively with countries that were in the past a part of the Soviet bloc and were therefore, in a sense, excluded from world trade. So we're living in a very complicated time, and it's likely to become more complex as communications further evolve. Indeed, if you look at traditional sectors, for example education, the one we're dealing with here, in the past it was chalk and talk. That's the expression. The lecturer would enter the room with a piece of chalk and some notes and proceed to draw on a blackboard, and the students would write it down. Now we have videos, we have teleconferencing, we have emails, we have forums, we have virtual learning environments, we have all sorts of tools which will facilitate learning. And we recognize that people don't learn at particular times, they learn throughout their lives. They learn throughout the day, they learn when they have spare time and when they're free. They learn to balance perhaps work lives and study lives. And the tools enable them to do this. So the world is becoming extremely complex. The changing nature of work and culture in the UK poses new challenges for HRM. Well, I say within the UK. In fact, it applies in most countries. But since the course is orientated around conditions in the UK, we relate it to the UK. But the changing nature of work and culture. Cultures are becoming merged almost. We are now more aware of other cultures. And throughout the world we're becoming aware of other cultures. We have immediate newscasts from right around the world. If something good or something bad happens in some other remote country, we know about it. We know about it almost instantaneously. I'm sorry to close that. We know about it almost instantaneously. So we live in a world where the nature of work is posing new challenges. People have to acquire new skills. People have to retrain. People have to continuously retrain as there are new developments in the type of work routines that we're involved in. There is a growing need to adapt employment contracts to meet the changing needs of the public. For example, the rise of zero-hour contracts and the need for flexibility. But some of these are to be welcomed and some are not. Sometimes if zero-hour contracts are forced on people in the sense they have no choice, then a lot of the time they would prefer to be working than to sit at home waiting for a phone call to see if they're required on the day. There perhaps may be long periods in which they are not required. And if they're not required, they don't earn an income. They don't earn a salary or a wage, and they can't pay their bills. So it doesn't seem very fair. But on the other hand, the companies need flexibility because the companies are forced to compete with global imports, cheap imports perhaps, imports from countries where workers did not receive a lot of salary or a lot of income. And that means the products are very cheap. And consumers want cheap products. So there are issues that need to be looked at and understood widely, but they are pressing issues. And the only way we can get a picture of this is by doing an environmental analysis. The way we can properly list out the points for and against and the points that are causing certain situations to arise. Technology advancements have put manual labour at risk, with more jobs being occupied by machinery. Now it's possible to have computer-aided manufacturing. So the machine is very sophisticated. The machine can be programmed, and it'll run a program which takes perhaps raw materials in at one end and gives out the finished product at the other. Perhaps in the past that would have to go through various stages, and various people would be involved, and they would have to have particular skills and be trained to enable this to happen. Now one machine does it, and perhaps the operator is only required to press the on button and the off button. So technology is eating into what was the exclusive area associated with labour involvement in manufacturing. Computers have revolutionised the service sector. The banking sector in the past was composed of paper files in filing cabinets, customers' accounts details, typed up, put into a filing cabinet. Now it's online, it's held on a server or servers, it's backed up, and we are able to get access to our bank account from a mobile phone. So the world has changed. Technology has eaten into what was in the past the exclusive rights almost of labour to be involved in those areas. So if we think of the organisation, we have a PESTLE framework. We have political factors that influence the organisation, what the politicians deem to be correct. For example, how long should people work? What's the involvement of the European Union in terms of their requirements for labour throughout the European Union? What are the working conditions? What's health and safety? So the areas where HRM was involved in the past and had perhaps had discretion in the past, that discretion has now been removed by political imposition. The governments now require companies to be careful about health and safety and issues at work and the working week, how long it should be and how many holidays and the conditions of employment. So the politics of work has changed. Of course, there are economic factors at play, global factors, as I said earlier, but also the European Union and technology, and we'll talk about technology as a separate factor in a moment, but technology has an economic impact in terms of costs. So there are many factors at play in terms of economic influences on the organisation. There are sociocultural issues. Societies tend to be multicultural. In the past, producers would have a good idea of the type of products that were required within the market because of an overwhelmingly homogeneous or homogeneous society. So the products were produced for that type of person. Now it's multicultural. There have to be different foodstuffs, different stores, different products. There are also different ways of working because of requirements from different socio-cultural groups. Technology, as I said earlier, it has an economic impact, but also it's so rapidly changing. It is so pervasive as well. It's everywhere, and it has made large changes into the way we live our lives, not just our working lives but our social lives as well. And there's a blurring of functions. People can work from home, whereas in the past that would not be could not be understood or accepted, because people had to be in the office or had to be in the place of work. But now perhaps people can work from home, they can work on spreadsheets, they can work on their accounts, they can send emails, they can deal with the organisation from a distance. Vast changes because of technology. A lot of these are captured in the legal system. The European Union sets out a legal framework for employment, and that cuts across all of Europe. And it has to be implemented by member states, who will ensure that workers in each country are treated the same. So there's a legal framework that needs to be looked at. And of course an environmental framework. There's increasing pressure on organisations to produce products which are produced in an environmentally friendly manner. They're produced in a green manner. And by green we mean less pollution. We mean in a more sustainable manner, where resources are not being wasted or depleted unnecessarily. Care and attention is being paid into how products are made and the possibilities of recycling the product at the end, recovering raw materials and sending them through the production process a second or even a third or so on number of times. So that's our PEST framework: politics, economics, PESTLE. Politics, economics, sociocultural, technological, legal and environmental. So let's look at each of these in a little more detail to complete this talk. We'll start with the political factors. Changes to government policy and public sector spending cuts have had a huge impact on businesses, on employment levels, education funding, training provisions. The government is a large employer in most countries. The government, through fiscal policy, as it's called, will tax the working population, will tax business, will tax expenditure. It'll levy a tax if the tax can't be shifted very easily. And from these various sources of tax revenue, it will make expenditures. And the expenditures will be on items such as defence, the police force, but it'll also impact on education spending, health spending, roads, infrastructure, and so on. And this we call fiscal policy. What's the fiscal policy of the government? Is it expansionary? Is the government taxing and spending more, or is it contractory? Is it cutting back on contracting on expenditure? Is it cutting back on expenditure? So the fact is that if the government cuts back, it'll need less workers, so there'll be higher unemployment. The government may have to cut back on education funding because it can't afford it. The only way it could afford it is by increasing taxes further. But if it increases taxes too much, companies may leave the country and move to another country where it's lower tax. If they increase tax too much on individuals, they may not work as hard. They may have more time off work because they think the more they work, the more they pay in tax, so why should they? So political factors influence the commercial life of the country. Changes to employment laws, the rise of more flexible employment contracts, part-time, zero-hour, temporary and subcontracts. The government sets the scene for employment through employment laws. What's legal and what's not legal? What's the minimum wage that can be paid to employees? What are the conditions of employment? What are the health and safety rules? How many hours a week should workers be allowed to work? What protection is there for part-time workers? Lifting trade barriers means easier importing and exporting, increasing in outsourcing and reducing business costs. So the government, by trying to liberalise trade, by getting more exports from the country, sometimes it has to allow in more imports. Well, this is normally done within the European context, in the case of the UK or in the case of any of the member states. There is what's known as a common external tariff. The European Union puts a tariff around all of the countries in the European Union, and importers must abide by that tariff. But it means that over a period of time, through negotiations with the World Trade Organization and so on, the extent of the barriers worldwide have been reduced, trying to encourage more global trade. And more global trade means, generally speaking, a higher standard of living. There are gains from trade. The law of comparative advantage tells us that trading is a good thing. So, with more imports, it means that existing businesses are under pressure to compete in the domestic market. Existing businesses must produce products at a very competitive price to try and beat the import prices. So there's constant pressure on business costs. Businesses must try to reduce their costs so as to reduce their prices to enable them to survive. So we see there are all sorts of factors. There are others we could talk about, like, for example, discrimination in the workplace, the role of women in the workplace, end of discrimination on the basis of gender or on colour or on culture or whatever it is. There are all sorts of issues that involve the government in business, and these need to be understood and taken into account. The next one is economic. Well, economic conditions of the country play a key role on the labour market and job availability. If the economy is buoyant, there is a lot of economic activity, then it's easy for people to find work. If the economy is sluggish and there are not many jobs around, then of course individuals will find it difficult to find gainful employment, and that means they will have problems in paying their bills and surviving. Now, economic conditions of the country can be influenced by fiscal policy, as I mentioned earlier, by the amount that the government spends. But the government itself doesn't have any money. The government has only got the money that it taxes from other people. And there's a limit to what people will pay in tax. So if the government has to pay off its debts and make sure it lives within its own budget, that means the government's not spending, so there'll be fewer people working for the government, fewer people working in local government, fewer people working in education, in health, fewer people working as administrators in government. And as the government winds it back, these people lose their jobs, and as they lose their jobs, they don't spend. And if they don't spend, companies who in the past sold to them, their income will fall, so they will want to make redundancies as well. There is what's known as a multiplier effect. And this means that the economy can get into a bad situation very quickly. So the economic conditions of a country play a key role on how the labour market functions and how well it functions in terms of bringing about prosperity and a good outcome for the workers. Jobs may not be available. Jobs may be threatened by wider influences, trading influences, as I mentioned earlier also. The UK is predominantly a service sector economy, which requires certain skill sets from employers and from employees. Labour and industrial jobs have become harder to sustain due to outsourcing. A lot of heavy industry from countries like the UK has gone to other parts of the world. So we accept that heavy industry will now be concentrated in places like India and China, in many other parts of the world. And they will go through the phase that perhaps the UK and many other countries went through in the 1960s, the 1950s, and so on, in the post-World War II era. But now the UK has switched to services, to tourism, banking, insurance, accountancy, the entertainment world, music. It's a different environment. And the UK export those services and in return receive back the manufactured goods which were previously produced in the UK but are now produced in some other country. So there's been a very dramatic change in the structure of the labour market in some countries. But also in the countries receiving the heavy industry, they've also changed. In the past, perhaps people were mostly agrarian, perhaps worked on land and worked on the family farm. Now they will be engaged in engineering, in manufacturing. And the family farm will be an additional source of income for the family. So the changes that have come about in the last, say, 25 years have been immense. The strength of the UK economy determines business growth and hence the need for labour. So the strength of the UK economy, which is determined by the buying power of the people living in the UK, their buying power, but their buying power particularly in the context of UK produced goods and services. If the buying power is aimed at buying imported goods, then of course that money is leaving the country straight away. But if it's aimed at buying UK produced goods and services, that will mean there is a need for more labour to produce those goods and services to meet that demand. So the economic conditions of the country are clearly important in the context of business. And these are just some of the areas in which the economic factors impinge upon the business. It's also social. Health and living standards have changed. There's a growing need for fitness and being health conscious. Business needs to invest in welfare provisions to support healthy living standards for their employees. There's been a revolution in the way people live and think. In the UK, in the past, smoking was widespread amongst the population. Now smoking is not condoned. So clearly those companies that relied on the tobacco trade have been affected. There is increasing pressure on alcohol consumption, and people are increasingly aware of the bad effects associated with excessive alcohol intake. There's more interest in fitness and in healthy lifestyles, in work balance lifestyles. People want to go to work, but they know they have a life outside of work, and it's a question of getting a balance between the two, what suits them. So this will obviously impact on businesses. Businesses need to accommodate this change, and it is a social change. And it's happening not just in the UK, but it's happening throughout Europe. It's happening in America. And it will be global, because once it starts, it seems to spread. In terms of education, there is a growing interest in apprenticeships and preparing individuals for the world of work. Apprenticeships is when particularly younger people, perhaps around 16 years old, join a company and are put on a training program by the company. they will be taught company-specific skills and also some generic skills which will enable them to move job in the future. But clearly they will know the company best, so they should have loyalty to the company. That's where they work. That's where their friends are. That's where their mentors are. That's where their instructors are. There's growing interest in that as opposed to going into a degree course. Now there's been a revision in thinking that apprentices and apprenticeships are valuable. And that sort of thinking is becoming widespread. There's also greater recognition for flexibility in education. Attending higher education for lectures and seminars, that's the traditional method, but there is a growing interest in the type of education that we're promoting here through electronic means, which is more flexible for workers. So people can go to work and get their lecture in the evening when they're feeling rested and they've done their work for the day. They can get their lectures at the weekends, or they can communicate with other students and with staff quite easily through electronic means. And it is every bit as much the quality of the traditional method. In some respects, there's more contact electronically. There are more sources of information. It's easier to find the information. There's less travelling. There's less work involved in getting the information or getting to speak to a tutor. It can be done online. So there is a revolution in education. There's greater understanding of health, as I said before, and there's a change in the workforce that's moving in this direction. Organisation culture and people's attitude to work has developed the need for greater employment flexibility. There is recognition that, for example, women have children who need attention. The children need attention to enable them to develop properly. They need to meet the requirements of schools and attendance at schools, and need to be dropped off at school and picked up after school. If they're not picked up after school, where will the children go? Not everyone can afford to have personalised treatment for their children, have nurseries or someone else to pick them up. So organisations, in order to get these women involved in work, they need to have flexibility in their working practices to enable the women to collect their children, or enable the men to collect the children. There's an increasing awareness of the role of men in this situation, and paternity leave is now widely accepted as important. So when family circumstances are changing, when a new baby is about to arrive in the family, the men should be given time off as well. So there's more flexibility is required throughout industry and commerce. But these are all new provisions, or perhaps a better way of putting it is rediscovered notions. They've been around by forward-thinking people for a long time, just never worked through or never implemented until recently. Technology, well, it's one we've talked about quite a bit in the last few slides, but the internet has developed new approaches to business e-commerce. We think of technology as the internet, but of course technology is a lot more than the internet. We have robotics in industry, we have computer-aided manufacturing, as I said earlier, we have very sophisticated machinery and automated processes. We have very smooth interfaces between people and machines, which enable people to be far more productive. Information retrieval is a lot easier because of the sophistication of databases. Research is easy. to perform research online and to store information and to recall the information. It's a different way of working, and it's not just the internet. There's amazing sophistication in computer programming, computer-aided design, computer-aided manufacturing. It cuts across nearly every facet of our working lives. And this technology is emerging all the time. It's getting easier to use. It's becoming more sophisticated. And it's programmed with an awareness of our requirements. Technology has opened doors for efficient global communications. And this is what partially has led to globalization and to the flow of goods that we see into the country. Cheap, perhaps, imports, or sometimes not so cheap, quite sophisticated imports coming into the country. But now the importers and the exporters can deal with each other very efficiently, very quickly. It's possible to teleconference with someone on the other side of the world. There's a time difference, but allowing for that, there is instantaneous communications, face-to-face communications, which was not available in the past. And it's easy for companies to research markets from a distance, to see the state of the economy, see areas where population is clustered, look at the fashions and the trends in that society. A lot of research can be done within marketing departments without leaving the building, because there is such good flows of information via the internet and via technology. Ergonomics has made the working environment more efficient. Development of machinery which work alongside workers to enhance productivity. It's as if the designers of machinery have studied the processes, studied what is required, and have developed machinery which facilitates that, so that the workers do not have to perform repetitive, boring tasks. But it's also the case that sometimes machines can produce items to a very high standard that would require a high skill level in the worker, and therefore the working population are becoming de-skilled as the machines become more skilled. Machinery, as far as the producer is concerned, of course have lots of advantages. Machinery can work 24 hours a day continuously. People can't do that. Machines don't, they may break down, but they don't generally get ill. They don't look for holiday entitlements, and there's no insurance costs with machinery and health and safety issues, and there's maintenance, I agree, and they'll have some power requirements. But there is now a more accepting stance in relationship to the use of machinery, and a lot of workers work alongside machinery. They work in conjunction with the machinery. There's almost a partnership between labour and machines in many areas of work. It doesn't have to apply on a shop floor. It could apply in the office, where people are working with very sophisticated software, as I said earlier, doing very sophisticated analysis that in the past would have taken a long time to consider. A good example of this could be something like statistical analysis. Some of the formulae in statistical analysis are very complex, and to calculate statistical data, for example, to calculate a correlation coefficient, to do it by hand is quite onerous. It takes a lot of time. Now, even a simple spreadsheet can do the same calculation almost instantaneously. I won't say almost instantaneously. It's as soon as we hit the return button, the answer is on the screen. Now that is the sort of productivity that machines bring to bear on the current working environment. But it does have an impact on employees and the type of skills that the employees need, and also an adjustment in the way we see machines. Legal. Well, legal requirements regarding health and safety legislation and the implementation of welfare provisions. As I said earlier, the European Union have rules about this, and the European Union lay down what's acceptable and what's not acceptable right throughout the European Union. There may be additional pieces of legislation that apply in some countries which go further than perhaps the European Union and would be approved by the European Union as well, known about and approved. There are legal requirements regarding the employment of people, health and safety being one, the use of toxic materials within the workplace, electrical goods and electrical machinery and so on, and also the length of the working week, rest periods, noise, pollution, good drinking water, rest facilities. All of these are legal requirements. People have to be treated properly. People are people. They're not machines. They can't run endlessly. They need breaks. They need to be recharged. They need food and water and rest periods. And also, they need to be able to interact with their colleagues. There is a social dimension. So having the rest period regenerates them so they're able to work more productively, but also it's less injurious to their health. Changes in employment contract and the need for greater employee flexibility. Well, as I said earlier, this is partly due to globalization. Companies experience increased competition from low-priced imports. They themselves must cut their costs, and this means they're looking for more flexible ways of employing people, and perhaps employing people not on permanent contracts, but on almost a day-to-day contract. It sounds like a solution, but as I said again earlier, it does lead to uncertainty in the employee's life, because they have bills to pay, they have families to look after. So it's not necessarily a good thing. But there's also pressure for flexibility from the employees. And again, as I talked about earlier, for example, in terms of family life, people want flexibility so that they're able to cope with the demands of a family, demands of children in the family. So flexibility has become the order of the day. This is what employers confront when they're recruiting. They're confronting people who in the past could work perhaps 9 to 5, and many can still do that, but a lot want flexibility. They want to be able to work at unusual hours in terms of what was traditional. They might want to start work at 10 in the morning and finish at 3 in the afternoon to enable them to meet family obligations elsewhere. So there's more demand for flexibility, but of course it's also the case that the technology enables this to happen. Some people can work from home and work easily from home. And again, as I mentioned earlier, you as looking at this and working through the lectures on this course will be working flexibly, will be working at your own pace and receiving tuition at a distance. Except there is an illusion with technology. You're able to contact the tutors, you're able to contact them immediately. You don't have to walk to the building or travel to see them. It's a question of simply contacting them, posing a question, getting an answer, consulting the forums and looking at the virtual learning environment. So there is more flexibility, there's more need for flexibility, but it's facilitated by better technology. And of course the impact of the European Union movement and the consequences of the UK leaving the EU, well, these are issues that would apply more specifically to the EU. But why it's mentioned here, so that people outside of the EU, people in Asia and in different parts of the world who are perhaps looking at this, will realise that the EU is a collection of countries, but the countries have their own requirements, and sometimes the rules that fit all of the EU don't fit all the countries and don't fit them easily. Some countries within the EU will want to maintain their own practices. So there are tensions within the EU, and the purpose of point 3 here is to indicate that we think, generally speaking, of the EU as one block of countries, and all the block of countries are moving in harmony together. That's not generally the case. There are differences of opinion. There are differences of regarding what the future should be and what laws should be enacted and what is the role of the European Union in each of the member states. And some countries want to have more freedom to determine their own courses of action than others. Some countries will go along with it, other countries don't want to. Other countries want to have their own code of practice because they believe that's the best course of action. And this is the debate that is constantly on the table in the UK. Politicians and people in the UK are constantly debating whether membership of the European Union is a good thing or bad thing in the context of the UK. The UK is an old country with long traditions, with its own legal system, highly developed legal system, its own social structure, it has its own currency, its own regulatory authorities. So it obviously poses the question within the UK, is membership of the European Union, full membership of the European Union, is that desirable? And politicians debate it from both sides continuously. And so also do the people in the UK. So when we look at the UK in future, don't see it as one homogeneous block, one block all moving in harmony together, moving on certain issues. Within the UK there will be differences of opinion. Some people arguing for, some against, and there will be compromises and debates and disputes. But out of it all, ways forward are found, either for individual states who perhaps work in conjunction with the European Union, or individual states who work within the European Union. And these have to be ironed out through negotiations between themselves. But don't see the European Union as one harmonious block. It is a block which is full of debate, full of issues and discussions and disagreements and compromises, and that's how it works. The environment. Well, there's growing concern regarding pollution levels and global warming has put pressure on organisations to be more ethical and reduce their carbon footprint. I said earlier that the UK is becoming more a service economy. Well, as it becomes more service-based, it obviously produces less pollution. Services, generally speaking, don't create a lot of pollution, whereas heavy industry may create a lot of pollution into the atmosphere. But the people in the UK still want manufactured goods, and these goods are imported. Well, in the past they would have been produced in the UK, let's say. So the UK would have a lot of pollution. Now those industries have set up in other countries, so the other countries have a lot of pollution. In a sense, the problem has just moved. But if we take a very macro view of this, it is a very serious issue. We live on a small planet that circles the sun. It's a very small planet. We have overpopulated the planet. There are too many of us on it, or at least many people think there are too many of us on it. There are very few resources. We have the seas, and we have agriculture and forestry and the extractive industries. And that's all we've got. We've got the atmosphere, and because of our way of living, we have managed to pollute the environment, so that now the planet is starting to warm up. And as it warms up, large parts of the seas will rise because of melting ice. And as the seas rise, there will be more flooding and more devastation on the land, and more people will die, and more people will be upset and hurt, and communities will be destroyed. And in a sense, we've brought it on ourselves, because we want more goods. We want more production. So we've polluted the atmosphere. And the only way to stop this happening is to cut back on the use of commodities that cause global warming. But also, we have, as I said, a limited planet, a limited supply of just about everything. We only live on a little planet, one planet, and we share this. And it's a zero-sum game, as some economists say. The more one group of people get, the less there is available for the others. So we all want more, but the planet hasn't got the resources to facilitate all of us. In the meantime, our population levels are increasing dramatically, and every person on the planet will require more resources. So there are real issues about the environment. Now, I don't think anyone's got a solution to this. I think what we do is we debate it, we discuss it, and then we move on, and we try not to think about it. I see, at least perhaps that's my cynical view of this situation, but that appears to be what happens. There are conferences on the environment and targets set for individual countries, and some countries achieve the targets and some countries don't achieve the targets, and when they don't achieve them, nothing happens. There's no punishment. People think, well, the country didn't achieve the targets, so we'll try again. In the meantime, we're running out of resources. We're running out of water, clean water, drinkable water. We're running out of land available for production. We are experiencing climatic change, and there is an increasing number of people who want resources living on the planet. So how that can be reconciled is difficult. We can't do it obviously in this session here. We can't do it in any session. I don't think the answer is that simple or that straightforward. But it is one that needs careful attention, and it's one that is going to become more discussed into the future. But that's one issue associated with the environment. The government has placed more emphasis on recycling, and the UK government now imposes tax on the use of plastic shopping bags. You can see some governments go right down to the very micro level. So people who go shopping in the UK, if they don't have their own bag, they'll have to buy a plastic bag from the supermarket. The supermarket is not allowed to give them a free bag. They have to pay for it. And that's hopefully to stop them using plastic bags. So it's a very micro policy. But at least it's a policy. It's something. It hopefully will make some contribution towards saving the planet. We should have more recycling and retrieving the good parts of products and trying to use them again, or trying to re-engineer them or remanufacture them so that they're more useful. So there are initiatives like this which are to be applauded. Changes in legislation to ensure fuel emissions have been reduced, and corporations are taking part in social corporate responsibility exercises. Companies are aware of what's required. It's just that companies face incredible competition because of globalization. And if the companies try to behave ethically and try to change their production methods so that they are producing less pollution, generally speaking, that means producing at a higher cost, and they're going to lose markets. As I said, we don't know what the solution is. I certainly don't know what it is. But we do know that it has to change, and we know that we have to do it soon. How it'll affect global production and how it'll affect trade flows and how it'll affect different economies is difficult to say. There was a famous writer, just to end on this one, a famous writer in the UK, a philosopher called Thomas Malthus. And Malthus came up with the idea a long time ago, back in the 1700s, that production is arithmetic. In other words, increases in production tends to be arithmetic. If we think of people working, they produce a certain amount. Well, next year they might produce 5% more because they become more productive, or they've have new methods of production. So output has increased. Let's say increased by 5%, or very dramatically it could increase by 10%. So output increases arithmetically. We add on a certain percentage. But human population, that increases geometrically. If we have two people, and these two people have a child, there were two people, now there are three people. The population has gone up by 50%. They may go on to have another child, in which case the population has gone up by 100%. And it'll have gone up by 100% in a few years. Whereas output has only gone up by, let's say, 10% or 20%. The population has gone up by, let's say, 100%. But some people may have 10 children. So the population has gone up by 1,000% or whatever. So Malthus was concerned back in the 1700s when writing about this. And the same issue applies today. There are real environmental issues to be considered, and it's well worth you doing some more research on this topic and being familiar with these pressures, because the whole idea of corporate social responsibility it's new to the literature. It's only been around for about 10-15 years, and it's emerged and it's becoming more spoken about, and certainly will be an issue that confronts industries in the future and confronts companies. So it's well worth doing some research into this and seeing what the arguments are precisely and making your own notes related to these. So on that depressing end, these are some of the resources that were used in the preparation of this class, and that's all we're going to deal with here. So let's leave it at that and say thank you for watching.